Our first guest tonight has 2 Super Bowl rings and a Sammy Baugh trophy. He was BYU's first consensus All-American and first Cougar quarterback selected in the first round of the NFL Draft. He's also a member of the College Football Hall of Fame. He threw 61 touchdowns at BYU and 84 more in the National Football League. It's a pleasure to welcome the legendary number 6, Marc Wilson. Marc, did I read that intro that you sent me accurately?
No. I didn't send it to you. It's been so many years. I would have never remembered any of that.
No, it's awesome stuff. And Marc is one of the guys that got it all going here. That quarterback tradition.
Oh yeah.
That everyone talks about. And you know, we've had Gary on the show, Gary Scheide, and I know that you're close to Gary, and he's one of the reasons you came here. But that quarterback tradition is really something, and you're right at the center of that. Really getting it going, and the first BYU quarterback to be a first-round draft pick, that has to just feel special. And what does that quarterback tradition at BYU mean to you?
Oh, it's funny when you're involved in it. You don't think about it too much, but as the years go by, it means more and more. I mean, it's such a great fraternity. It was such a great experience to be there, especially during that time with Lavelle, and then all the guys that I played with and all the guys that followed. It's just one of the real joys of my life to have been a part of that.
Hey, what's your favorite Lavelle Edwards quote? You had to have heard a million in practice, games, the aftermath, the after years. What is it?
Well, it's more of a story. I think my favorite was in 1978, going into the 1978 season. That was my junior season. In those years, Playboy magazine, they would give, kind of prognostications to start the year. And they estimated that BYU would finish 7-5, which was not very good, right?
Yeah.
And they asked Lavelle about it. And this is my favorite Lavelle kind of quote. And he said, well, to be honest with you, it's not that big of a deal because there's not many that read Playboy magazine in Provo, Utah.
Dave and I always tease. When I was there, we went up and played Wyoming in a blizzard, which I'm sure you've had that wonderful experience of playing up in beautiful weather in Laramie, and the fans are so nice to us. But it literally was snowing sideways, and we lost. And this was Jimmy Mack's senior year. And afterwards, Sports Illustrated was there, and they said to him, what'd you think about that? He goes, well, I thought a lot about it. I would rather lose and live in Provo than win and live in Laramie anytime. And it was the National Sports Illustrated quote of the week, and people in Laramie have hated us ever since.
They still remember that. That one you don't get over.
Yeah, they hated us long before he said that.
That's true. That's true. He wasn't hurting any feelings that hadn't already been hurt. So take us back to your first meeting. How did that go with Lavelle Edwards back in 73, 74 time frame? You were at Shoreline High School outside of Seattle, and your first opportunity to meet with Lavelle.
Well, I was actually at Shorecrest High School.
Oh, Shorecrest.
My bad.
Shoreline. Yeah, I was at Shorecrest. It was a crazy time. My high school, we didn't have a lot of guys that went from high school into, college football or major college football to that, and so to be a part of that and to have coaches come, especially coaches like Lavelle come, was such a huge, huge thing. The guy that actually recruited me was a guy named Dave Craigthorpe, who was the offensive line coach. And Dave had that area of the country. That's how they divided it up. And Dave became, very close friends to not just me, but to my parents. And that makes a huge difference, in recruiting when the parents can trust the coach. And Lavelle came kind of late in the process, and, Lavelle was Lavelle. And, just a wonderful guy. My parents felt like they could trust him with their son. And, that was kind of that.
Now, USC was high on your list, right? As a sophomore or a junior? Was it USC at Washington?
Actually, what happened to me was in my senior season, I broke my jaw in the second or third game of the year and only played, 2 games my senior season in high school. Prior to that time, I was being recruited by, just about everybody on the West Coast for sure. And in those days, it was the Pac-8.
Yeah.
And University of Washington I only lived 20 minutes from the campus, the University of Washington, but they were going through a transition. Don James was leaving, or Don James was coming in, and And there was a lot of questions about what that program was going to do. And I didn't know who Don James was. He came from Kent State, and I didn't even know where Kent State was as senior in high school. So, that was not really an option in my mind. Really what sealed it was, you talked about Gary Scheide. What sealed it was that Gary led the nation in passing in 1974, and that got my attention. And what really got me thinking was, as a quarterback, did I want to go to a school like even USC, because they were recruiting me? Did I want to go there and hand off, 55 times a game? Or did I want to go to a place like BYU that had come on the national scene as a team that was dedicated to the passing game and get a chance to throw it 35 to 40 times a game? And that's really what it came down to. And, Gary showed that it could be done and showed it could be done very successfully. And like I said, that got my attention. And at the end of the day, that's really what kind of swung it. That's why I went to BYU.
How did you, this is long before SportsCenter and long before ESPN. So you're over in Washington State. How did you follow BYU? How did you know what Scheide was up to?
Well, you had to work at it. You had to kind of try and get a hold of papers and, that kind of thing. It was mostly print media at the time. And then you'd have to get the box score kind of thing and read the stats. But that's what I did. And, I was a member of the church. And so through the member of the church network, we kind of kept track of what was going on, and people would share information. And that's kind of how it happened back in those days.
And when you came, Gifford Nielsen was here. And what did you learn from Giff in the time that you were serving as a backup to him before he got injured?
Well, Gifford, let me say this, first of all, that, Gifford is a unique guy, great guy. Everyone knows that. And Gifford was so generous with his time, but I would stand right behind, Blaine, this in practice, I would stand right behind the huddle. So I would hear the play in the huddle, even on 7-on-7. And then I'd watch Gifford drop back, and I'd try to read the defense from there and figure out where Gifford was going to throw the ball. At first, I had no idea. But after a while watching him, I got to the point where I knew where he was going to throw it based on the route and based on the coverage just about every time. But Gifford was a master. I mean, he could read defenses, and Gifford was so smart. And I honestly believe to this day that if Gifford had not been hurt in 1977, he would have won the Heisman Trophy. He would have been the first, consensus All-American. He would have been the first round draft pick. He would have done all those things. He had, prior to his injury, he had a phenomenal season going. We had a phenomenal season going, and Gifford would have done all those things. So getting to that close, that proximity to a guy that could play that well and was that smart and that well versed in the offense, and getting to watch him every single day was just such an amazing thing for me.
Couple of questions from our live streamers tonight from around the world. Midward 1 says Wilson for president is 78. You'd have to go back in time to put that campaign together. But the Outlaw Bandit says, hey, Mark, what was it like having Jimmy Mack as a teammate? On the other side, there was Giff at first and then Jimmy Mack on the backside.
Well, there's one more guy in there that is forgotten, a guy named Dan Hartwig. Dan Hartwig came, and Danny was a very highly recruited guy to Walnut Creek, California. Big guy, 6'4". He weighed about 230 as a freshman in high school and can throw it about 80 yards. In fact, Dan, it was funny. Dan would get a little discombobulated when he dropped back sometimes, and he'd just say, okay, forget it. He'd throw it down there 80 yards. Now, it wasn't completed, but everybody would go, you got to be kidding me. I mean, this is unbelievable. And Dan left, there was a lot of competition. I mean, you mentioned Gifford's name, my name, Jim's name, and then Dan was in that mix, and Dan got a little impatient and transferred out. And I can't remember the name of the school he went to in California, but Dan ended up being like a 12th round draft pick for the 49ers. So there were 4 of us on that field together that all ended up in the NFL. And it was an amazing experience. And of course, nobody knew anything at the time in terms of who was who and what we were going to do. Right. All you knew is that, we'd never seen a collection of guys. I'd never seen a collection of guys like this before. And if you went to practice and you weren't on your game, you're going to get embarrassed. So you had to show up every day and pay attention and, give it your best effort, or, these guys that were around you were going to embarrass you. But back to the question about Jim. Jim was great because Jim's such a great competitor, and Jim was such a great player that, like I said, having all of us in that mix was really for all of us, to be honest, it was a great thing because it pushed all of us, well beyond we probably would have gone, without that kind of competition.
It's interesting, Mark, because today, You just don't see that. You don't see 4 NFL quarterbacks on the same. I don't even care if it's Alabama. You don't see it because guys coming out of high school are going, well, when am I going to play? Am I going to play as a freshman? If I'm not going to play at least by my sophomore year, I'm out. I'll go someplace else because they're promising me I'm going to. And they don't want to compete. Oh, you signed that guy? Well, if you signed that guy, then I'm not coming. I'm going someplace else. It's very, very different now than it was then. What's the difference? And is it good for kids to have that mentality these days?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I guess, based on my experience, I would say no. And I know it's not easy to stay and to kind of stay in the fight and stay in the struggle and keep, grinding, because that's what it took. But it took that for all of us. And at the end of the day, all of us were better for it. And if I had left or Jim had left or, Dan did leave, but if I had left, I just know it would not have turned out the same for me. And I don't know, I can't speak for Jim, but I do know that competition every day, that level of competition every day, in my experience, was a phenomenal thing.
Marc Wilson's with the Wise Guys tonight, legendary BYU quarterback. Coming up in a few minutes, we're going to show some highlights from your San Diego State game, and then we've got some highlights from your time with the Raiders. We'll go back in time a little bit. But before we get to that, 1977, Gift goes down with a season-ending injury. Your first starts against Colorado State, and so you can imagine the great anxiety among Cougar Nation. You come in, you throw 7 touchdown passes, and you win the game 63-17. You get one chance to make a first impression. We'll talk about the next week in a minute. But in that moment, Marc, what did that feel like?
Well, it was crazy. It totally was, because nobody expected that. And to be truthful, I didn't expect it either. In fact, the night before the game from the hotel, I sent my dad a postcard from the hotel. And I said, Dad, I'm dedicating this game to you because more than likely this will be the first game I ever start in college football. So it came out of nowhere. I will say, the backstory to that game and how that all happened was really pretty interesting, because Doug Scoville was the offensive coordinator. Mm-hmm. And when we knew that Gifford was going to be lost for the season, he called me into his office. It was like on Tuesday. And I knew that Gifford was lost, and I knew that I was going to have to step up and play. And I hadn't started a game since my second game as a senior in high school. So it'd been a long time, because I redshirted. I sat out as a freshman. And Doug put this playbook down in front of me on a desk, and he said, I want you to take these sticky, and he put a stack of sticky notes, and he said, I want you to put a sticky note on every play you like in this offense. And then he said, because Marc, you're not Gifford.
Oh, wow.
and it doesn't make any sense for me to call plays that Gifford's good at, or that Gifford even likes, if you don't like those plays.
Right.
And so I put a sticky tab on all the plays I liked. It just so happened they were all rollout plays. Now, how many times do you think we rolled out with Gifford as the quarterback? 0.
Never.
Not
right.
one time. And so Doug looked at me and said, what's with all these rollout plays? And I said, well, here's the deal. I grew up as a little kid playing two-hand touch in the street, and I'm a lot more comfortable running around. And, if you just make me drop back, especially in the face of this pass rush from Colorado State, because they had 2 guys that were eventually first-round draft picks off that defensive line, we're going to have problems. And so just let me roll out, shrink the field, take away some options. And if I can't figure it out, I'll just run. I'll get a few yards anyway. And to Doug's credit, and this is a big part of this story, to Doug's credit, because Doug had coached Roger Staubach in Navy when he won the Heisman Trophy. He'd coached in the NFL. And here was this skinny guy from Seattle who had never played, who wanted to roll out. And Doug changed the entire offense, and we rolled out. And it caught Colorado State completely by surprise, and that's what led to the 7 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Wow, that is a phenomenal story. So Marc, Doug recruited me, and the thing that I remember most is I asked him about Steve, and I said, "Well, I know Steve. We've known each other, because we're both. He was in Connecticut, I was in New York, and I was like, what's Steve's future? Is he going to stay at quarterback?" And he goes, "You don't need to worry about Steve Young. He will never play quarterback at here, because I will never have a left-handed quarterback ever." And, of course, he left shortly after that recruiting season, and then Ted Tollner took over. And Ted didn't seem to have a problem with the lefty, and it all turned out okay for Steve. But Doug promised me that Steve would never play quarterback at BYU if I came out there. I thought that was awesome. But for him to adjust the game plan like that is pretty amazing. And then the next week, Dave mentioned you go out to Wyoming, and that game wasn't wasn't quite.
It was different.
Quite the same.
No, it was actually the same because when I went to Colorado State and threw the 7 touchdowns, I set a WAC record.
Right.
And then I thought after doing that, I thought, this is not that hard. I'm just going to keep setting these WAC records. And I did. When I went to Wyoming, I just continued on this WAC record setting pace with 6 interceptions in one game.
But you did win. You guys won that game.
We did win, and we won it on a rollout in the fourth quarter. We threw a touchdown to the left-hand side of the end zone on a rollout play that kind of we used the week before. And, it's so funny when you look back because Colorado State, I'm sure they thought they're bringing in this guy who's never played. We're going to blitz the heck out of him, and this guy's going to have no chance. And, Blaine, by blitzing, it's man coverage. It's actually easier, right? Well, then Wyoming said, okay, we just saw what he did against man coverage. We're going to drop 8 guys into coverage.
Oh, wow.
And that's what they did all day. And I kept trying to throw it into that coverage. It didn't work so well.
Yeah. That's what BYU did to USC the last couple of times they played. They tried to run that air raid, and BYU's like, we'll just drop 8. And if their quarterback won't run around, then they're going to have problems, and they did. But if somebody would have told you at those first 2 games, that phenomenal start against Colorado State, the little bit of a struggle even though you get a win against Wyoming, that you're going to finish your BYU career with a 22-4 record, you're going to be a first-round draft pick of the National Football League, what would you have said at that point?
Well, I probably would have said, you're crazy. I mean, I would have hoped it would have turned out that way, but I think in that moment, I would have had a lot of doubts about that.
Let's go to 1978. This was a very interesting time. Lavelle decides to have you split time with Jim McMahon, and we'll get to 79 in a moment. But just the notion of sharing snaps, what was that like?
Well, again, you got to know the backstory because it wasn't exactly that.
Okay.
So Doug left and went to the NFL. He went back, and they hired a guy named Wally English who came in, and it didn't turn out so well. I mean, let me just say, after 40 years, that Wally had a lot of problems with Doug and all the success Doug had. And so Wally wanted to kind of forge his own way. So Wally changed the whole offense. Wally changed all kinds of things because Wally was afraid that if we did the same thing in 78 that we did in 77, kept the same offense with the same guys, that Wally wouldn't get any credit. They just say it was Doug's offense and Doug's guys. So Wally went out of his way to change everything under the sun. And, we led the nation in passing in 1977. I don't believe we led the Western Athletic Conference in passing in 1978.
Really?
And it was a miserable year. It was not just for me. It was miserable for Jim. It was miserable for everybody. And here's a story that nobody knows. So when that season was over, I had redshirted. So I was basically ready to, graduate. But I was done. And I talked to my dad at Christmas time and said, I can't go through another year like this. I think I'm just going to take a few classes. I'm going to graduate. I'm going to move on to law school. And that's what I was going to do. So I went to Lavelle and because my dad said, okay, I'll support you in that, but you got to tell Lavelle. You can't not tell Lavelle.
Yeah.
So I waited about 2 weeks because I was too scared to go tell him. But I walked in finally and said, Lavelle, I got to tell you, I'm not going to come back. I'm just going to go to law school and graduate. And Lavelle said, you don't have to decide that today. There's no reason you have to decide that day. Wait 2 or 3 months, see how it feels, and then come and talk to me in 2 months. So I said, okay, but what you need to know is when I told him that, he pulled out a manila, a legal pad, and he wrote my name down, and I was at least 20 guys down on that legal pad. 20 guys had gone in there before me.
Really?
Wow.
And said the same thing. So I wasn't the only guy that felt that way. And this is what Lavelle did. Lavelle was a crafty, smart guy. Lavelle went to the NCAA coaches convention. He talked up Wally English, and he got Wally English hired by Pittsburgh. And then he brought Doug Scoville back. And Doug Scoville was the coach in 1979, and we were right back at it. But 78 was a miserable year.
Wow.
And I've never said that before, but I think after 40 years, it's finally time.
Yes,
to tell
you
the
can
story.
say it. And when I talked to Lavelle about the two of you, I was like, what about the decision to redshirt Jim? And he does say Doug felt like we had 2 NFL quarterbacks. So Doug, he did credit Doug. He said Doug felt like we had 2 NFL quarterbacks. We had to figure out a way to split them up. Mark had already redshirted, Jim hadn't. That was the only way. Jim didn't like it, but that's what we had to do. And it turned out right. Doug was right. That's what Lavelle told me about that. And so about And how did that get communicated to you that you're going to be the guy, this is going to be your deal, and Jim's going to redshirt?
Well, what happened was Lavelle called a meeting, in like February. And it was odd because we never had team meetings in February, and we all met over in the Richards building, and we're all sitting there. We didn't know what was going on because it was a kind of a strange out of nowhere meeting. And Doug and Lavelle said, hey, I want the defense to go down the hall to this room, and the offense, I want you to stay here. And so the defense got up and walked out. And then Lavelle said, there's somebody I want you to meet. And Doug and Lavelle walked out of the room. So we're all sitting there like, what's going on? And in walks Doug Scoville. So we didn't know any of this was happening.
Oh, wow.
And in walked Doug Scoville. And Doug was so funny. He walked in, and this is what he said. He said, we got a guy sitting in this room that's better than anybody I had last year in Chicago. He said, I don't know what happened this year, but we're going to get back to work. And Doug walked out of the room. That was the end of the meeting. And all of us guys said, okay, we're in. We're not going anywhere.
That's awesome.
And that was it.
What a story. And I interviewed Jim McMahon a couple weeks ago for our season premiere of Countdown to Kickoff. And I asked him, because, he didn't like sitting out because he wanted to play. But the way it all worked out, I asked him, was Lavelle right? And even Jim said, you know what? He was right. I didn't like it at the time, but he was right. And sometimes you just have to listen to your parent or your coach or somebody who guides your life, because they just might be right and change your entire life. Changed yours, changed Jim's.
You're exactly right. And, I'll even go back to 1978. Well, I remember when Lavelle called me up to his house to tell me that Jim was going to start. That, that's not fun. That is not fun, I got to tell you. But, at that time, given what was going on and all the things that were happening, it was probably the right decision too. I didn't like it so much, but, looking back, it probably was the right decision. Lavelle was not very often wrong. Lavelle was a very, very smart, intuitive, insightful guy, very, sensitive to his feelings about things. And Lavelle was, in most cases, always right. And we could trust that.
Yeah. Well, and all it did was produce 2 first-round draft picks. You were the first, and then Jim right on your heels 2 years later.
And you both have 2 Super Bowl rings.
And have Super Bowl rings to show for us. So the proof is in the pudding.
I'll tell you, it produced more than that, because Robbie came, Ty came, all those guys came because of the success that had happened earlier.
Absolutely. We were talking about that San Diego State game, and that was one of the games that affected me in coming to BYU. I was an LDS kid growing up in New York, but I didn't know BYU that well. And I was Penn State and Pittsburgh were my 2 home teams, and I took recruiting visits to both of those places. I was supposed to go play for JOPA and got a scholarship offer there. But 2 games stood out in my mind. The one was the San Diego State game. I think it was the first BYU game ever on network television. And on
ABC.
On ABC. So we could get it back in New York. And I remember you coming out in that game. Al Michaels is calling this game, for Pete's sakes. And you completed your first 3 balls for 3 touchdowns. I'm like, what's the pass efficiency rating on this deal? Like, it was so ridiculous. It was jaw-dropping. What was that day like on national television?
Yeah, it's so funny, Blaine, because, again, the backstory is so funny because, we all knew this game was on national television, and, I was in the thick of the Heisman Trophy thing. And so it was an interesting game from that standpoint. And for whatever reason, sometimes in warmups, you've had this experience, you can't complete a ball to save your life, and there's no defense. Guys are just running routes, and you're throwing it over their head, and you're throwing it at their feet, and you're throwing it everywhere but where it's supposed to go. And warming up for that game, I could not complete a pass. And Doug Scoville did not want to take the offense into the locker room until I'd at least completed 1 pass. So finally, I completed a pass, and as soon as I completed 1 pass, Doug said, okay, that's it. Let's go in the locker room. So I'm sitting in the locker room thinking, man, this is a great time to forget how to throw the ball. Nationally televised game, Heisman Trophy candidate. This is perfect. And then, what happens is you get in the game, and it's part, you don't think about it, and you're just reacting. And then, thank goodness, we completed a few passes.
Well, you throw for 4 touchdowns. You ran for 1. You win 63-14. And I was watching this yesterday and listening to Al Michaels' commentary, and he says, this Marc Wilson is as good as advertised, because this was a huge opportunity for BYU to be on ABC.
it was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And that was, of course, that was just the start, because from then on, it was not uncommon to have BYU on national television because they were doing some interesting things in college football at the time, the way that they were throwing the ball.
And as I watched that film, I don't know, I hope you could see that from your vantage point, Mark, on your screen, but watch just some of the names and some of the people that we've been friends with. I'm watching Scott Phillips run around out there and catching balls,
Homer
and Clay
Jones
out there, and Homer and Eric out there catching balls, and Danny Plater, was a dear friend of ours right until he just passed away. Came to our house every Sunday for dinner for about the last 5 years before he passed, I just watching those gives me a little bit of goosebumps. What's that feel like for you to see that old gang out there on the field with you?
Yeah, it brings so many smiles to my face. Such a great memories playing with those guys. Clay Brown at tight end, of course, and I mean, we just had such a great team. I've said this too, and I've been on record saying this. I know BYU's had some great teams, but I'll tell you, I'll take that 79 team against any team in BYU's history. We had some great, and not just on offense. I mean, we had great players on defense. I mean, the defense often gets overlooked, but we could play the way we did on offense because we could take every chance under the sun, because if it didn't work out so well, it didn't matter because we had such a great defense. And knowing you have such a great defense is such a comfort for a quarterback, because you can do some things you wouldn't ordinarily do.
What do you think the score would be
if
the 79 team played the 84 team?
Why do you want to do that to Mark and I right now?
Because we're deep into the truth here.
So, hey, I'm going to say that. I'll say this right now. 79's team way better offensively than we were in 84. Way better.
What about defense?
I will put that defense with Kurt Govea and Leon White and that whole crew and Kyle Morrell.
Would you want those guys chasing you down, Mark?
No, you're right. That's a great defense. I don't want to say what the score would be either, because that also was just a phenomenal team in 1984.
Yeah, 79 is one of the best offenses I've ever seen in college football. That Mark, led and engineered just such a phenomenal season. You need to know, Mark, whenever we talk about the great teams, we always talk 79, 80, because they were so prolific offensively. 79, 80.
Steve Young always says 83 might have been the best
Steve says 83. We're like, come on, Steve. But and they were really good. They lost the opener to Baylor. So we go 79, 80, 83, 84, and then we always give 96 their due because that team that Sark
played 15 games.
Yeah, they played 15 games. They won the Cotton Bowl, first New Year's Day win. So those are the ones. So that 79 team is always in that conversation when we do shows on the greatest teams in history. And I think that offense is one of the best I've ever seen in college football, 79.
Hey,
we had some great players.
Here's a comment from Bluesville 1. Mark, happy to be listening in to your conversation tonight. Have you had a chance to visit the facilities on campus? Any remembrances on the locker room, equipment, Floyd Johnson, etc.?
Oh, that's a great comment. Yeah, it's what we had in 79 and 78 and those years doesn't look exactly like it does now. I'll tell you. Yeah, I mean, it's phenomenal what they have now, and I'm really happy that they have it and they've done so well. And then back to Floyd, LaVelle was certainly a huge influence on all of our lives. There's no denying it. In fact, we can't really even overstate the influence that LaVelle had on our lives. But the other guy who was right in that same boat was Floyd. And really few people even know Floyd or have ever heard of Floyd. But Floyd was a one-of-a-kind guy who all of us dearly loved. And he took it upon himself to kind of, to shepherd us in so many different ways. And how we did it, Floyd would show up in the very early hours of the morning to get to that locker room. And we all knew he was there starting about 4:30 in the morning. And if we had trouble, if we had problems, if we had things that were bothering us, we'd get up early and we'd get to that locker room at 5:30, and we'd spend some time with Floyd and he'd get us right. And I can't tell you how many times I spent, those early morning hours with Floyd. I loved Floyd. I couldn't love a man more than Floyd Johnson. Yeah. He was a huge influence in my life.
That's great.
Yeah, Lloyd, he basically organized what would become eventually the BYU Athlete Speakers Bureau. Yeah. And he would get us all involved in speaking around the state and around the country. And he's just like the impromptu bishop of the team.
That's a great way to say it.
And was phenomenal. Like, just he had such an amazing impact on all of us over many generations.
Yeah.
Over many generations. Really cool. There's one of our listeners, Barrister Beast, just tweeted in or texted in and said, "I love hearing about this era. My dad, Lloyd Eldridge, played during this time." And then we both remember Lloyd really well.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Hey, look, so you're 11-0. You're number 9 in the country. You go to the Holiday Bowl, and Indiana beats you 39-38 after a 27-yard field goal goes awry as time expired. I was there as a little kid in the stands. From my angle, I thought the field goal was good. That's how bad of an angle our seats were. But that was going to get you undefeated, maybe up in the top 5 or higher to finish out. Sports has a lot of highs and lows. What was the moment like walking off the field after that?
Oh, it was heartbreaking, and it was heartbreaking for a lot of reasons. One of my best friends on that team was Brent Johnson, the kicker,
right.
and still is a great friend of mine. And Brent had kicked, I think, 3 or 4 field goals in that game, and I mean from deep, 50 some plus yards were a couple of them. And looking back, we didn't do Brent any favors because the hash marks so wide in college football, and if you are close to the end zone and you're trying to kick a field goal, you got a really funky angle to make that kick. And what we should have done is I should have ran the ball to the middle of the field and fallen down and then kicked it from the middle of the field. So we didn't do Brent any favors. And we all talk about a 27-yard field goal, but nobody realizes that at that angle, that's not very easy. It's not an easy kick.
Yeah.
And it was just heartbreaking to lose that way because Brent had such a great year. Brent was a great kicker in his own right. And Brent's had to talk about that and live that down all these years. Believe me, people often remind him of that kick. And it would have been fun to go undefeated. It would have been awesome. And that was our goal going into the season. We knew we had a great team, and that was to win, to be the first team to win a bowl game from BYU. That's really what was on my mind. And so to lose it that way was a rough way to lose it.
Well, and it was made worse because it was only bowl game Lee Corso ever
Lee
wone.
Corso. I've never heard the end of it from
Indiana.
Lee. He brings it up every time.
It's all he's got.
Yeah,
it's all he's got.
That's it. So, hey, one of our viewers, BYU Sports Addict, says, "Hey, Mark, what's the single biggest difference you see between the physicality of the game today and when you played?"
Well, no question. Everyone is, and you mentioned in the comment, everyone is so much bigger and faster. For instance, my starting center at BYU, a guy named Scott Nielsen, was, about 6'4", and he probably weighed 215, 218, 220 at the most. I didn't weigh all that much less than him as the quarterback. And now, of course, that'd be unheard of. There's just no way you could survive with, a center that weighed 220 pounds. So the game is quite different. Guys are huge now, and the speed of the game's picked up too because people. Let's be honest, people are better athletes today than they were in the mid 70s, and there's just a lot of things you can do with athletes of that caliber. And you've seen even the progression of the offensive schemes and all the player different formations and sets that they use. It's really fun to see what's happened, but it's a different game today than it was in the mid 70s, no question about it.
Marc Wilson's with us on the Wise Guys. Let's go back in time here and watch you play for the Raiders. They take you in the first round. How different was playing quarterback in the NFL from playing quarterback at BYU through your personal experience? What was the difference as we watched number 6 in silver and black?
Well, the biggest difference was at BYU, 99% of our routes were 5-step drop routes. And so our receivers were down the field 12 or 14 yards. There was a lot of timing involved. And that's kind of how we played. It was kind of maybe the precursor to the West Coast offense. Then I got with the Raiders, and 99% of our routes were 7-step drop routes, and our receivers are down the field 22 yards before they break. It was an entirely different way to play. It was really a power way to play. And, it took a little getting used to. The other thing that was interesting about it was we won 2 Super Bowls, and we won them early in my career there with the Raiders. And when you win the Super Bowl, sometimes you get this idea that you're doing things right. But what was happening was defenses were getting a lot better, especially from a pass rush standpoint. And you just could not, drop back, 99% of the time with 7-step drop routes and expect you're going to hold the ball for 3.5 seconds or so.
Like, you just threw the ball 55 yards. As you watch this video, do you remember?
It reminds me of how vertical a passing game the Raiders ran when you were there. It's all vertical.
Here's another
game.
bomb.
Yeah, that's what I meant when I talked about it was really a power game. So, you had to drive the ball 25, 30 yards on just normal routes. And then we threw a lot of deep balls. It was a fun way to play, but it was not an easy way to play because you had to have, 3.5 seconds or so to throw it. And that became increasingly more difficult, as the years went on and guys like Lawrence Taylor showed up.
Yeah. Hey, somebody asked us earlier, who's the best defensive player you ever faced? That's a name that might have to come into consideration, right?
Oh, yeah. And the guys that were great, you knew they were great when the offense changed the entire scheme that week to deal with that one guy. That's when you knew that there was something special about that guy.
Hey, here's something a lot of folks don't know. In your first season with the Raiders, you're going to the Super Bowl. Dan Pastorini gets hurt. Jim Plunkett's named the starter, and that makes you the backup. So you're the backup at the Super Bowl in your first year as a pro. Are you out of your mind either praying for good health for Plunkett or maybe a little dinger and all of a sudden you're in the game? What was that like?
Well, Dan got hurt in the 5th game and 16-game season. Then we went to 4 playoffs games. So by the time we got to the playoffs, I'd been the backup for, quite some time, a number of months. And so I was used to that. It was fine. But if that had happened like real late or in the playoffs, yeah, you're exactly right. That would have been a very nerve-wracking proposition. But I had a couple months, to kind of get used to that, role for the Raiders.
You win the game 27-10. Now you got a Super Bowl ring after 1 year. And then in '83, you're marching along as the starter, get banged up. Plunkett comes in for you, and you go win another Super Bowl.
Yeah, I became the starter. I broke my shoulder against the New Orleans Saints, and I was gone for the rest of the season. They activated me in the playoffs because, and this is, again, a funny backstory, because I had been the holder for Chris Barr. And when I was out for, all that extended period of time with the broken shoulder, Ray Guy was the holder. And when we got in the playoffs, Chris Barr went to the coaches and said, okay, I don't know what it's going to take to activate Mark, but I'm not going in the playoffs with Ray Guy as the holder.
That's awesome.
So I couldn't even raise my left arm above my head. So the deal with the snapper was, listen, you can roll it back there, but you can't snap it more than about a foot off the ground because he won't catch it.
Wow.
We didn't have one problem in the playoffs, but it was a little dicey.
That is a great and hey, perhaps, and I don't know if there's much argument, the greatest punter in the history of the game, obviously not the best holder in the history of the game.
And that got you on the field for the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it did. But you're right. Ray was unbelievable punter. And to tell you how fun it was to be around Ray and watch him punt was my dad would come down to California or wherever we were, LA or Oakland. He'd come down once a year. He'd take a week off work and he'd come down when we had games on the Sundays, back to back. So he could see 2 games and watch practice all week. And he'd come to practice and he would watch Ray punt. He wouldn't watch his son playing quarterback. He watched Ray because it was a spectacle. I mean, when you would watch him, and he would do it over and over, and you watch Ray Guy punt one ball, and you've just never seen anything like it before, and you can't believe it the first couple of times you see it.
It's mesmerizing, right?
Oh, it is. It was truly incredible. Ray was an amazing athlete, and Ray could throw it about 85 yards himself.
Oh, my goodness.
Ray was a great athlete.
So you trot out onto the field in the Super Bowl. And you're playing the Redskins, the Commanders now, and you're down there on a knee. If there's no fake field goal or extra point going on here because you can't raise your shoulder. But you're in the Super Bowl waiting for a snap. How cool is that?
Oh, it was so cool. And I was tempted to call an audible to pass it so I could throw at least one pass in the Super Bowl, but the game was out of hand. I didn't think that'd go over very well.
Probably not. Somebody would have got after you, but that's awesome. Hey, we watched you throw a pass to Todd Christensen.
Yeah, there's a couple in that highlight reel where you had a couple completions to Todd, our good friend.
And the Outlaw Bandit writes in, hey, Mark, what are your fond memories of playing with Todd, who played with the Raiders while you were there?
Yeah, that was really, really something because when I got to the Raiders, I wasn't sure. I didn't even know that Todd was there. And so having him there, was such a wonderful thing for me, having a guy that I was familiar with, that we played with, that we came from the same school, we had the same background. It was fantastic having Todd there. And it was interesting because when Todd first started, they wanted to move him to tight end. They wanted to move him to tight end before he got to the Raiders. He didn't want to do that. When he finally got to the Raiders, it was kind of time to say, okay, I'm ready to do whatever you want me to do. And if you want to move you to tight end, go ahead. But Todd was behind, Raymond Chester, Dave Casper, Derek Ramsey. These guys were great players in their own right. And Todd was like fourth on the totem pole and had never played. And the thing it's funny how this all works, but the thing that got their attention was I was the backup quarterback and Todd was the fourth string tight end, which meant that on the defensive day, I got all the snaps because I was running the other team's offense. And Todd got to play a lot too, because he wasn't the starter. He wasn't the top of the rotation, the tight end group. And so when we played the Chargers, Todd and I would just light up the defense like you can't believe, because Todd was playing Kellen Winslow and I was playing Dan Fouts. And so when we played the Chargers twice a year, I'd come to practice and Todd and I would both be looking and smiling at each other saying, okay, today's our day and We're going to get them today. And that opened a lot of eyes, with what Todd could do. And so when Todd finally got his chance, I think it was against Miami, my second year, Todd caught a couple touchdown passes against Miami in that game, and that was kind of it. He was off the races.
I have such fond memories of Todd because he and I worked in broadcasting together for a number of years. We would fly into the airport, fly into Denver, and drive to Laramie, Wyoming together. And man, if you want an interesting 3-hour conversation, you get in a car, just you, and you don't need to turn the radio on. You just talk to Todd, and he's just full of information. But the thing I remember, I think I'm getting this right. One year, Todd didn't just lead tight ends in the NFL in receiving. He led the National Football League in receiving as a tight end.
Almost. It came down to one game. It was a Monday night game. It was the last game of the year, and we played the Rams, and we played in the Anaheim Stadium. And we knew going into that game that Todd needed, I think it was 9 catches, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, because all the other teams had played. So we were the last game of the year before we got to the playoffs. It just so happened that Marcus was also kind of up to lead the league in rushing. So it was kind of a weird situation, because we had a running back that we wanted to get yards so that he'd lead the nation or lead the league in rushing. And we also had Todd where he needed, a number of catches to lead the league in receptions. And we didn't quite get there.
Did you get Marcus Allen there though? Did Marcus get it?
Marcus got there. So Marcus led the league in rushing. I think he was the MVP that year. But Todd didn't quite lead the league in reception, but for a tight end, certainly led all the tight ends and just had a great year.
Just a few more questions for Marc Wilson, who's been great to spend so much time with us tonight on the Wise Guys. In your 10 seasons in the NFL, played for the Raiders and Patriots, you finished with 14,391 passing yards, 86 touchdowns, and 5 touchdown runs. If you could do it all over again, going back to Pop Warner, even before Shorecrest High School, what skill would you work on the hardest?
Oh, that's a great question. I've never really thought of that, that way. My era of guys, we didn't specialize in one sport. We played all the sports. Yeah. So I played football, obviously basketball and baseball. And I'm glad I did, because if you had made me pick one sport at those years, I don't know what I would have done, but I'll tell you, it wouldn't have lasted very long, because I would have gotten bored and probably wouldn't want to continue.
Yeah.
So that was a great thing for me. And, looking back, I think that was actually the right approach. I think it's even the right approach today.
Play everything.
Because, to play everything, because every sport's going to require a little bit different out of you, and that's just going to make you a better athlete, a bit more rounded player. But as a quarterback, I think, but again, it was a different era. It was entirely different. We didn't have game films to watch. We didn't do any of that stuff. In fact, I thought I knew a lot about offense in high school, because my strategy was drop back and throw it to my buddy who was the receiver. That was my strategy. Nice. There was no reading defense. It was finding my buddy and throw it to him. So when I got in college, there was a lot to learn. So going back, assuming there was somebody that could kind of show me what to do and how to go about it, I would probably spend a lot more time kind of studying what the game was all about and why you did what you did.
Yep, that's great. These guys now, That's a big difference maker. I can tell you that
they go off the sideline. They got a laptop.
Yeah, they get a laptop and they show them it kills me that they get immediate feedback when they go over there and they show them what the defense, the pre-snap read was and what they did. It's amazing. So, and that's the information that Jaron Hall has with him. I know you follow the Cougs. Jaron Hall's got a big season ahead of him coming up. Big expectations. What do you like about his style of play?
Oh, I love the way he plays. He's such a great athlete. He can run. Running is, I think it's not overrated, but the reason why it's so important is because there are a number of plays that are going to happen during that game where really there's no chance in the passing game. And so you can either throw it out of bounds or hopefully if you can run a little bit, you can make something happen out of a situation where there's really no chance for success. And, you're going to get a handful of those plays every game. No matter how good you are on offense, it's just going to happen where the defense has got it right. They've got it dialed in right. And you don't really have a chance to succeed. So if you can buy yourself some time and, improvise a little bit, what a great, thing that is for the offense. And that's what that guy can do in spades. He's great at buying himself some time. If he has to run, he's great at running. He can throw it on the run. He can make things happen when there's really nothing that's going to happen unless he just, lights up things with his athletic ability.
Cougars report to camp tomorrow. Do you remember your first day checking in August of 1975?
Yeah, I was scared to death.
That seems to be the running theme.
I was scared to death. The other funny thing was I had never thrown a leather football.
What?
Yeah, growing up in Seattle, you think we threw leather footballs?
No, it rains too much. They do a rubber baseball.
Rubber balls over there.
They were all rubber balls. So, I hated the feel of these leather footballs. Just trying to get used to that was enough, not to mention the fact that we had this offense that I had to learn. And it was nerve wracking. It really was.
So you come in, you're highly touted. You show up, you say, I'm Marc Wilson. You get your bag. How did you get number 6? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah, I do remember that because I wasn't number 6 as a freshman. I wasn't number 6 as a redshirt. I didn't get numbers. No, I did get number 6 as a freshman. No, as a redshirt, because this is what happened. As a freshman, I didn't suit up for any games, not one. And I wasn't on the depth chart, so that didn't matter. If they had let me suit up, it was just as a gift to let me stand on the sideline with the uniform on, right? So, and to be honest, I hated going to the games and sitting in the stands. So my friend Niels Tidwell, who was an offensive guard from Boise, we never stayed around. We drove up to his place and went pheasant hunting. I could not stand to sit there in the stadium and watch these games. So my redshirt year, one game they let me suit up, and I go to get my uniform, and it's number 6, and I'd never been number 6 before ever. So I went to Floyd and I said, Floyd, what's with this number 6? And he said, well, you're from Seattle, right? I said, yeah. He said, there was a great quarterback that played for the Huskies. Do you remember a guy named Sonny Six Killer? I said, yeah, he was like our hero growing up as kids. He said, well, then you're from Seattle. You got to wear number 6.
That's awesome. So Floyd gave you the number and the reason behind it. Floyd gave me the number, and I have worn number 6 ever since.
Well, now your number 6 is hanging up at Lavelle Edwards Stadium with your name next to it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a great honor. Yeah. Great honor.
All right, we got 5 questions for you.
Ready? We do this. We do this for everybody because we had a guest on that's
Scott Warner, social media guru.
Yeah, and he said everybody when you meet people, you need to know these things about them. You got to ask them these things.
Go ahead. You fire it up.
Yeah. So these 5 questions from Marc Wilson.
These aren't meant to take a lot of thought either.
No,
even though
this is the first thing that comes to your mind. Favorite movie?
Rocky.
Oh, I love it.
Hey, how did you like Rocky Balboa, the very last one?
It was different, but I liked it.
I thought they tied that together. Yeah, it was good.
It was fun.
Okay, good. Favorite band?
Favorite band. Oh, I'm not a big band guy.
It could be
average white. Here you go. Average white band.
Oh, I love it. AWB.
Average white band.
See, now Marc is like, he's coming from my, I'm always telling Dave I like hip hop and stuff, and he just wants to listen to AC/DC, and we just can't get along on music.
So do you remember the cover for Average White Band that was kind of a guy with looked like a bum on the average?
The W was the bum.
Yeah, the W. So my mom took a sticky tab and stuck it over that. So.
Oh, nice.
I love it. Average White Band for awesome. Marc. Okay, favorite cereal?
Cereal, I'll take Wheaties. Yeah, I like Wheaties.
There you go.
That's another old school right there.
Wheaties. Dave said Captain Crunch without the crunch berries, which I have no comprehension of that. But, so, favorite fast food?
Hamburger.
Favorite fast food hamburger. Like, what's your favorite place to get a fast food hamburger?
Oh, I like that JCW guacamole burger.
Oh, I like that. I try to tell my kids there's nothing wrong with McDonald's, but they're not with me on that one. For some reason, McDonald's is out of fashion with young guys. So, favorite BYU quarterback not named Marc Wilson?
Geez, that's tough because I love all those guys. But you know what? I think I'm going to go with Robbie Bosco.
Really? How come?
I thought Robbie Bosco was so great in college. I loved watching him. In fact, another funny story, Todd and I are on a plane. We're flying back with the Raiders. We're going to play the Giants back in New York, and we're watching, and we have these mobile televisions, which nobody had at the time, but we had them on the plane, and BYU's getting killed. And Robbie brought him back and won the game, and that was just so fun. But I've always loved Robbie as a person, but I thought he was a great quarterback, and I thought it was just so unfortunate what happened in his pro career. He's hurt his shoulder, I think at the bowl game, and like Gary Scheide, never really was the same, and it cost him his pro career.
Yeah, it went. So Rob and I were roommates as freshmen, and we're dear friends. The problem for him was that they went undiagnosed for too long. And so because he didn't get it fixed right away, it never really healed up. I always say this, Mark, like Robbie reminded me of you. He reminds me of all the quarterbacks that played, the great ones, reminded me the most of you. And for this reason, I felt like the two of you had the best deep touch of the quarterbacks. Each guy had their skill set, right? And I'm just like, man, Mark throws this just beautiful deep ball. Then when Robbie was in his prime, I'm like, man, Robbie reminds me of Mark. Like his deep throws where you got a defender underneath and it's just right over the defender's hand and just drop it in there on that deep post. You and Robbie were like elite, otherworldly on those throws, and I always thought Robbie reminded me of you, so I love that he's your favorite quarterback.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, now that you're back in Utah, are you going to come be a guest on our countdown to kickoff and do some of that stuff?
Oh, I'd love to. You just got to invite me. Yeah, I'd love to be a part of that.
Okay. Well, that invitation's coming, so we just want to make sure you're game.
So happy to have you here.
And you should know that my youngest brother of 10, I got 5 sisters and 4 brothers, so there's 10 of us. His name's Marc, M-A-R-C, because you played football at BYU.
Wow, that's great. That's fantastic. Well, can I just say one more thing, and that is, we started this talking about Gary Scheide, and I love Gary, and I honestly believe this. If it were not for Gary, well, it started with Lavelle. Lavelle had to have this vision of the passing game, had to go find Gary or a guy like Gary, and fortunately found Gary. But if it wasn't for Gary, I don't know that we'd be talking. It all comes back to Gary. I just don't want people to lose sight of that or forget about that, because that's such a huge part of our history.
He has spent a lot of time with us because he's worked a lot of television with us, and I mean, he's an amazing baseball analyst. Gary knows so much about baseball.
He was live on this show about a month ago from his fishing outfit in Minnesota, showing us these giant fish he caught. We couldn't tell if they were photoshopped or not, but we had some fishing stories with Scheide, and we told him. And he obviously, I wrote that article about him, and you had a big part in that. And he was very touched that you thought of him so highly.
He thinks the world of you, and we do too, and we think the world of him.
Well, thank you guys, and thank you for having me. This has been so fun to kind of reminisce and tell some old stories.
Hey, thanks for the time.
This is a format, Mark, that we just thought we need to do this type of thing, a live stream that they can repost as a podcast. Because the TV that Dave and I do, it's sound bites. It's 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. We never get to just sit down and have 3 guys just reminisce and talk football. So we have so much fun with this. We're so glad that you would come on and spend this much time with us.
And we learned a lot of things tonight.
You gave us some great stories. I loved it. Thanks so much, Mark.
We hope to have you back on, too. So this is we want you to have a regular spot with us. And we're glad that you're back in Utah County and making the most of your master's, your MBA from Washington, and your college degree in economics at BYU still rolling along. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, guys. Been a lot of fun.
Marc Wilson, one of the greats at BYU. We got to call Max and tell him that Mark's interview was so much better than his.
That's absolute.
How do we back? We back up Max and we come back with Mark, and then Robbie Bosco is going to be with us
so good.
in 2 weeks. And
Rob's going to.
I learned a lot. I didn't know he was ready to walk.
I didn't either. The whole time, we've learned some of these stories over time. Like we didn't know that Tyler Algier was going to quit, or that Peyton Wilgar was done,
had left.
But we've learned those in recent years. But I had no idea that Mark and a bunch of the team was ready to be out, and Lavelle recognized that and said, "No, going to change things. Doug's coming back," and I had forgotten that Doug left and went, and of course Doug was there through that 1980 season. Doug was part of recruiting me along with Big Fred Whittingham. Those were the two that recruited me. And then right before I came, Doug left to go back. Well, Doug left to go be the coach at San Diego State and to be a head coach in college football. But what a great story. I had no idea. He had a bunch of stories I'd never heard. I don't think that Mark's told anyplace else before.
No, and I also didn't know that he was on the field of the Super Bowl holding for kicks.
Yes.
I thought he was out.
Who knew?
And so he's got his ring and he earned it.
And who knew that he was on the field, because the kicker, Barr,
was not gonna
said, "I will not have Ray Guy, the greatest punter in the history of the game, hold for me another game."
That's awesome.
That was such a great story.